Welcome to Transformation 2.0, the podcast for change leaders. My name is Chamara 𝗧𝗿𝗶𝝾, and in each episode, we bring you real conversations with executives, innovators, and experts who are shaping the future of business. Whether you are leading a team, scaling a company, or navigating the challenges of transformation, this podcast will provide you with insights, strategies, and inspiration to drive meaningful change. Join us as we explore what it takes to lead, adapt, and thrive in an ever-evolving world. Let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Transformation 2.0. I have 𝗠𝗲𝗺𝗁𝗍 from the Calvary Healthcare today with me. He is the head of Organizational Transformation at Calvary Healthcare. I'll let Tony introduce himself. Welcome to this podcast today, Tony.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. So a bit about me, I guess. So I've spent the last nearly 5 years at Calvary Healthcare providing various roles such as organizational transformation, procurement, revenue cycle optimization, major program delivery, 𝗕𝗵𝗻𝗆, and prior to that, spent 10 years in Optus Enterprise, really focused on government enterprise clients. But my journey really started working in small tax practices, building my way to become a chartered accountant, which is where I saw my career going. And I got there. I worked as a chartered accountant for a year after graduating from university and just realized it wasn't for me. I found myself really drawn to wanting to work in fast-paced, change and volatile environments where you get to see outcomes and drive change at scale, as opposed to routine and business as usual activities. So I sort of made that pivot very early in my career to go into the project management space. I was fortunate to get a role doing that early on in Optus, which was fantastic, and really learnt what it meant to be customer-centric and drive change for customers and create value. And sort of my career journey has then spanned numerous roles, numerous clients, numerous different projects and functional responsibilities since then, and hence here today in this transformation role at Calvary Healthcare, working in the health space.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Tony. So in terms of the episode today, obviously we talked about it. We are going to go through and look at how to design and execute transformations at scale and across complex regulated industries like healthcare, and then looking at the role of enterprise portfolio management in delivering measurable impact, and also looking at lessons from healthcare in terms of how to balance operational efficiency, digital adoption, and cultural change. And lastly, why transformation leaders must combine strategic clarity with people leadership to create sustainable results. And in terms of, I guess, maybe the starting point today, Tony, what I would like to have a look at is, why is this the ability to drive transformations at scale is such a pressing challenge in organizations today, right? So obviously, you're looking at your background in telco and also the work that you're currently doing at healthcare. What do you think is the need for actually driving transformation at scale that's really making organizations think of transformation as an urgent need?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think there's several factors at play here. So if we take an external lens first and you look at the actual market, particularly in Australia, and we'll talk about the healthcare sector and the telco sector. So with healthcare, there is significant regulatory reform. So if you think about the Aged Care Act, there's been a lot of reforms in the private hospital space to do with funding, health funds as well. There's also been a lot of discussion, particularly in the media and from a federal and state government perspective, around public-private partnerships and the role that private enterprise has to play in supporting the broader healthcare system. In addition to that, you have industrial complexity. So these industries, similar to financial services, telecommunications, healthcare, and many others, are highly regulated environments. There is a high degree of compliance activities you need to ensure, but there's also a high degree of adherence to complex regulations around ensuring people are safe, people are looked after, people are paid fairly and appropriately in line with expectations at a federal and Commonwealth level. And these are all industries where people are providing face-to-face contact and are providing services directly to other people, particularly in healthcare. Mm-hmm. So there is a higher degree of risk that you need to manage for. These factors are continuously increasing, and and organizations need to factor that in addition to how do they manage their costs, drive their revenue, maintain a customer experience that retains and attracts new customers, as well as an employee experience. But think about the healthcare sector overall. There is a massive shortfall, particularly in the nursing workforce. It is a small pool that everybody is trying to sort of grab from. So what do? You have to grow your own, you have to look international, you have to try attract and retain and develop your staff. The only way to do that is to think holistically about a system. So not a system in terms of technology, but think of a broader system of your systems thinking.
As in 𝗠𝗲𝗺𝗻𝗋𝗋's systems thinking.
Absolutely. You have to have that broader mindset as how do all these pieces fit together? And what is that vision for your organization? And how do you, I guess, make those strategic bets? And what are those key decisions you need to make in the near and long term in order to maneuver through all these challenges externally? You then look at every organization in the modern era, they is all dealing with cost pressures, financial pressures, changing expectations. If you think Gen Z and other generations have different expectations of the work environment you need to navigate. Also the rise of AI and the disruptive impact that is having on workplaces. It is not just the hype cycle. It's not just a fad. There are tangible ROI use cases already in existence, not just from a commercial perspective, but quality of care perspective as well. And mind you, all these sort of trends equally occur in the telco space and have equally occurred in the financial services space from where I've worked previously. Disruption is high. There are so many entrants in the market, both locally and domestic, new players, existing players, all going up the stack or down the stack, trying to go vertical. So it is a highly complex environment that these organizations work within. Piecemeal approach to change and transformation doesn't cut it. All organizations are thinking about their entire value proposition, their overall operating and business model, bringing that systems thinking and therefore thinking about that broader large-scale transformation of their organizations. And hence, I'm seeing that imperative to drive that large-scale transformation more accepted now than it probably has been in the last few years.
Thank you for sharing that. And I can definitely relate to the highly regulated nature of financial services, telco, and healthcare. And I think the fact that that pressure is there to actually do more with less is definitely ever present. And I think where I kind of think there are other threads that we can pull on is when it comes to things like AI, right? And I think a lot of organizations are today thinking about AI as it's an efficiency or productivity enabler. And I think that this is where, like at 𝗠𝗲𝗺, we kind of take a slightly different lens around AI. We think of it as how do we rethink our business with AI as a capability that sits alongside us today, rather than just like thinking about what we were doing previously and just trying to automate it or augment AI, right? And I think that's an area I really think where we have a lot of opportunities to explore for most organizations, not just in healthcare, but also telco, financial services, and a lot of other industries as well. And I guess maybe broadly to the entire economy, right? Because at the end of the day, like AI presents this new opportunity for us to rethink about what's the role of each individual in the organization, what's the role of each business, and what's the role of the industry, or broadly what's the role of the society, right? And I think there are lots of opportunities around AI that really makes me excited. To me, I think when it comes to transformation, I think where we really see some different threads around AI is around how we actually rethink about the transformation itself. And maybe we can go into a little bit about your approach to designing and leading enterprise-wide transformation, and then explore that a little bit in terms of what that could look like with AI as a capability to actually drive transformation. From your perspective, what do you see as kind of the core areas of what you focus on when you're planning and driving a large transformation, Tony?
Yeah, great question. So there's probably three areas for me that I tend to focus on in particular. The first is ensuring there is an aligned vision. We have that North Star, that objective, if you will, on where are we actually heading. Transforming for the sake of transforming, a from-to shift, where it's not clear on what we're actually going to become, makes no sense. You end up with all this wasted effort and misaligned sort of resources and people and spend that doesn't really amount to much. So I very much focus on, do we have an aligned vision, an aligned objective? The second thing I then focus on is how do we measure the outcomes and how do you translate that vision into outcomes? I don't focus on the outputs and the process. That is flexible. There's a saying a former leader of mine used to say to me all the time, which was tight, loose, tight. And that was about being tight on objective, tight on outcome, but loose or flexible on how you get there. And I very much bring that approach in. If you have that clear vision and aligned vision, and you're clear on those outcomes and they're measurable, how you get there, you can enable that flexibility and empower your teams to come up with the right tools, the right approaches, the right methodologies, the right frameworks for the jobs at hand. I don't believe in one tool or one approach or one methodology for everything. I believe in a toolkit, which is the second point. My approach is enabling a toolkit, the right tool for the right job. An example of that is you've seen probably in the past organizations all go down the path as we must be agile. Agility and being agile is very different to an agile methodology. What I believe in is if you want to use an agile methodology or a linear or predictive methodology, like say waterfall, or you want to do a hybrid, or you want to go down a consultative method, you might want to use some design thinking and service design principles. You might want to bring in some third-party expertise to augment your internal teams. You should be able to do all of that if it's the right fit for the nature of the work, the risk profile, and the outcomes you're looking to drive. Because no one piece of change and no one transformation is the same. They're all unique. The third piece, and this is really important to me, is that change management and engagement and influence starts from day zero. It is not a step in a process. It is not something that happens when you get formal sign-off and the business case approval. Change management, engagement, and that people-centric approach starts from day zero. It starts from before you even start the transformation. It starts from the very first conversation where you have with your executive team, your peers, and maybe your own team and others about, hey, we actually need to think differently about our organization. It starts from day zero. And I am seeing so many transformation aspirations, if you will, not amounts, and not become realizable sort of changes in organizations because those conversations aren't had. People just assume, people just think everyone's on board and they're not. People just assume everyone understands the strategy and they don't. People assume that people are going to love all this change we're going to bring to an organization, and they actually don't. It starts from day zero. So they're probably my three things: that outcome and objective focus, really thinking about a delivery toolkit, the right tool for the right job, and change management and engagement from day zero are probably the three things I do in any large-scale transformation I look to set up.
Nah, definitely. No, thank you for sharing that. I can definitely relate to them as the core base as the core areas of where we need to build capability for large transformations. And I think what the point you mentioned about the aligned leadership and the outcome focus, that's pretty crucial. And I think like what I've seen with some of the organizations is that when it comes to the leadership alignment and the outcome focus, it can get a bit tricky where there's quite a few senior leaders involved in the driving the transformation. And also when it comes to the methodology, being able to use the right tool for the right job, that I definitely get that as well. Where I've seen challenges with that is usually there's this, the perennial war about, which methodology are we using? Are we using a more human-centered approach? Are we using a more
Yep.
top-down plan and execute approach? That approach, that constant war is always there. And I think like when it comes to the human-centered approach, I definitely agree with what you said about being able to bring the people on the journey. And I think I where I kind of see a lot of challenges for most organizations is this aspect of when organizations kind of decide, yes, we want to implement this particular technology solution, and then let's try and bring the people on the journey, right?
Yep.
And to me, I think that's where this becomes quite tricky. And I know there's a state in Australia that's currently actually driving a large healthcare transformation that's just decided, yes, we're going to use this EMR, this is what we're going to be implementing. I'm not going to name which one. I'm sure you can guess. And I was actually, going back to this CIO and saying, look, it's nice that you made this decision, but do you know if this is the right solution for you, and do you know how your people are going to respond to this, right? And I think like when you're talking about how you take people on the journey, this is where I really see that like when you make a platform decision up front and then try to bring people on the journey, it really becomes tricky. So like maybe we can deep dive that a little bit and think about what you're thinking is in terms of how you try and make something like that, I guess, more adaptable to the people, and how do you manage the change in that kind of situation?
Uh, Absolutely. So ideally, you clarify the problem you're solving first, and then you think, and if you're looking at a platform as a potential solution to part of that problem, you make that decision subsequently. Other times you inherit a decision's been made, we're using platform X, whatever that platform might be, and you're now left carrying the baby, if you will. What do you now do? A platform decision's been made. Now you have to re-engineer everything around that and bring people on the journey. And that is a much harder situation to be in because, well, there's this sort of notion that the platform's the solution, but is it really? Is technology really the solution to the challenge? I don't think it is. But what do you do in that situation? My view is you've got two options. The first option you have is to say, right, before we invest any more money on this platform, we're going to stop and actually really get clear on what our needs are. Well, how is the platform going to enable a change in process, a re-engineering of our way of working, operating model? How is it going to solve the most pressing pain points or address or seize the most largest opportunities our stakeholders or users have? And how do we prioritize the investment we have in this platform to focus on those things? So you take the situation you're given, the hand that you're dealt, if you will, and you make that conscious decision and say, right, we're going to actually really reprioritize what we use this platform for based on our needs as an organization, based on what our customers and our people say are the most important things. The second option you have is to go potentially an MVP approach where you do the bare minimum with that platform day one and you iteratively improve and enhance and invest over time based on addressing value chain, based on addressing new capabilities you're looking to launch, new products or services into market potentially, depending on the nature of the transformation. That is a much trickier sort of option to go down because you're requiring investment and commitment from people for a much longer period of time. And if people don't see what they want to see in that MVP, you can lose credibility and trust. They're really the two approaches I've seen adopted work that I've had to utilize in that second scenario where the technology decision's been made before we've actually determined what the problem is we're looking to solve. Yeah. Now, ideally, you go and think about the problem you're solving up front and then think about what technology stack or mix may support your solving that problem and may become the enabler to addressing those pain points. Sometimes you can get buy-in and stakeholders and you have time to do that, but other times you're very pressed for time and a decision's been made or there's commercial reasons why you may go down one path. I've been in scenarios in other organizations in the past where vendors come to you with significantly discounted SKUs and pricing, and it's almost not worth going to market because it's ridiculous. You can't justify a business case to spend 2 or 3 times more on a comparative product versus the one they're offering you, and it's got a good reputation. It's a tier 1 platform in the market, or tier 2 potentially. It's a very tricky situation. But in any case, you have to be transparent about why you're making that decision. And you can't negate the people and process aspect of this transformation and just say the system's going to solve everything. The system should be invisible. It should create a frictionless experience. It shouldn't be the thing that we spend all our time focusing on, this system or this technology. Think about your end users. Do they actually care? 9 times out of 10, probably not.
No, that's definitely something I can relate to from experience as well, and what you mentioned there in terms of the two approaches, that definitely resonates. And I think to me, like the area that where I'm starting to move my head into at the moment is, like obviously we talked about AI before, and I think like this is where I really see AI creating a lot of opportunity for most organizations, where my thinking at the moment is that the traditional business case for buy versus build was because a platform's pre-built already by a vendor, and hence it should be actually cheaper to buy it and use it, right? But then like right, with AI enabling much faster software development and much more efficient software engineering approaches, where we are starting to see is actually this pivot from organizations that used to think about buy was their first priority, actually it's starting to explore more build, because now it's actually a lot more efficient and cheaper to actually start building software and start creating more high performance software engineering practices, right? And to me, I think the opportunity around that is actually how it enables organizations to think about the human-centered design element in terms of how you design your user experience for the employees as well as for the customers that you're serving, right? And being able to bridge that gap between the experience that you want and then the software that you're building, right? To where I really see opportunities for organizations is actually like, rethink about when they're going through that buy versus build decision, to actually think about something that addresses the kind of like the core needs of the organization as the core solution, and then try to build the experience around it within the organization. That way you have a lot more opportunities to actually bring the people on the journey and create and design something that's actually suited for your organization.
Absolutely. One thing I will just add to that, and sort of building off what you just said, I was just in the US in the last week at a large conference talking about all things in change, transformation, project, program, delivery, etc. And we got onto this same topic. And some of the more innovative business models that are out there today, so not a pipe dream, not a future, but today, to your point, is where if you think about your existing systems as systems of record, where they house, they are the record of key data, transactions, information, metadata about, clients, employees, transactions, information. Organizations have already made significant investments in those systems. In healthcare, there are thousands of systems that, particularly if you run, private hospitals, or as an example, there are so many point solutions that exist out there. Trying to get large-scale EMRs, DMRs, cost prohibitive for most organizations. With AI and with integration, orchestration, automation tools that exist today, organizations are starting to think about, well, if we have these systems of record, how can we build this layer above that has the right user experience, the right capabilities, to your point, using generative AI and other tools that really meet the needs of our people or our clients today, that has then the interface and the orchestration and integration with our existing systems. So you can keep your systems as records, add systems of records, but people use this layer above, which is their experience layer. And that is becoming much more economical and much more adaptive to user needs with the advent of generative AI tools and sort of, augmented coding tools in particular. There never has been the case. And I find that quite an exciting value proposition for organizations, not just internally to use within their environments, but as, I guess, marketable products and services as well. So just really building on what you're saying as sort of new business models and new thinking.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And I think like when you look at that, what I also kind of explore on is this: most organizations have a significant cost footprint of running their legacy software, right? Legacy systems they have, right? But if you go down this path of actually just building a layer on top of it to provide that experience, then what happens in most organizations is actually you've already got a cost footprint. Now you actually build something on top of that, and now you actually got a much higher cost footprint of running that capability, providing that capability, right? So to me, the question to most organizations is about actually like how do we rethink that stack and think about how to shrink that completely and create something that addresses the broader capability that needs, but then rethinking the product model in the organization about let's say you're onboarding patients in a healthcare organization. How do you think about that as a digital product, right? And rethink that the both the system that you're using as well as the operating model around it in terms of how you need to evolve that, right? So if and to me, that's the area that I usually talk to customers about, not just looking at the legacy systems and the experience layer, but just rethinking the whole capability as a new digital product, and then being able to wrap that as a new capability that you deliver, whether it be built using a platform that has low code, no code, or using high performance software engineering to actually recreate from scratch, right? And to me, I think like that's where a lot of the opportunities are. And maybe just flipping the lens onto healthcare and looking at operational efficiency and compassion as the two sides of what you need to balance at the end in healthcare, right? So if you go down transformation, let's say not just systems transformation but a business transformation for a healthcare business, right? how do you manage that balance between the being able to provide the operational efficiency, but at the same time the compassion and the patient-centered care for an organization? What are some of the things that you've started to focus on in terms of being able to identify the stakeholders and being able to bring them into these conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. So when you think about a healthcare organization, their mission, their purpose for being is providing high quality and safe, effective care. And that could be whether you're a hospital provider, aged care, home care, retirement living, you might be in pharmaceuticals, you might be in primary healthcare, you might work across that entire continuum of care. That is their primary focus. And the big shift when you're running large scale transformations in balancing that operational efficiency and sort of commercial lens with patient safety and care lens, there's sort of two or three elements to it. The first being is to find where those, I guess, lenses intersect. Because in many instances, people will provide that safe, high quality care, irrespective of the hoops and hurdles they need to jump through with their inefficient processes or legacy systems or tools or current ways of working and practices. And the opportunity is to look at, well, how can this initiative support them in providing that same level of care or potentially enhance that level of care, but take friction out of the process for them? So you go back to the basic principle of what's in it for me. How am I making their experience better? How am I easing the complexities that they need to navigate day in, day out, and make that sort of the center focus of your project or program? The second piece is really around having the right stakeholders in the room in your discovery or diagnostic and design phase. So designing transformation programs or initiatives without frontline staff or clinicians or VMOs or your third-party sort of suppliers, without their involvement up front, you end up taking this really insular internal view that is sort of detached from reality. And what you may think is important, I want to automate this process. I want to get rid of 90% of this workload because I can. From their perspective, they might be saying, well, that's great, but how does this actually help improve patient flow? It doesn't. So who's right and who's wrong? I'm looking at one lens, they're looking at another. And so you really need to have those people in the room and really, in my view, come up with, this is the list of ideas. This is the list of things we can go after. Now let's prioritize them based on these different lenses and these different factors. Let's mutually agree what are the things we're going to prioritize now and focus on now. If you don't have, and I go back to that day zero engagement starts from the first conversation. If they're not in the room having that conversation with you and you're not designing that program with them, they're going to feel like it's being done to them and they're going to disengage. The third piece I will say, it's about, and this is where I've sort of found, at least I've struggled with myself personally, and I've been talking to a number of people about this, is how do you measure and quantify outcomes in a healthcare setting? In telecommunications, where you think about product economics and you think about revenue as ongoing annuity revenues or once-off revenue, the business cases are much more simplistic, in my opinion. But in healthcare, when you start to introduce a lot of qualitative indicators, a lot of qualitative outcomes, they start to become a lot more complex where your transformation isn't purely commercially focused. So if I'm looking to redesign, say, a facility or a hospital or corporate services functions, that's one thing. Where I'm looking at improving quality of care or looking to remove friction from processes, looking to address a lot of that compassionate care outcome as well as the commercial outcome, it's really thinking about your first, second, and third order benefits and impact and coming up with the model. And that's something I've spent a lot of time developing myself, which is a benefits realization model to account for those things in a way to start measuring, even if it's proxy indicators. Because unless you have something you can quantify or see that you're heading in the right direction, how do you ever know you're making that tangible impact? You can ask people, but that then becomes just perception. I like to have data and some kind of trend, some kind of insight that says you're actually kind of on the right path or you're not. Intervene now and course correct. So that's some of, I guess, the thinking in sort of how you balance those, different aims.
No, thank you for sharing that, and I can definitely relate to the perspective you brought with the lens from telco versus healthcare, and I guess maybe just me coming back to your experience at Optus versus what you're going through now. Maybe if you can look at, how did things that you did at Optus using agility as an approach versus what you're doing now at Calvary in terms of, the patient-centered, human-centered lens as the focus. In terms of the execution, what's the different lens that you apply?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with what's very similar across these industries. And I think I'll just start by prefacing that where you've worked across industries like you have, like I have, like many others have, you start to pick up on what is the same and what is nuanced and what is different. So if I start with what is the same in terms of what you can transfer across and what I've been able to transfer across, it's that clarity on, objective and outcome. It's being able to design sort of strategies to take an organization or a team, a function, a service, a product, what have you, from where it is today to where it needs to be in the future, and being able to mitigate risk, focus on resolving issues, and really that strong stakeholder engagement. Those skills are transferable. The way you approach those things, the way I've approached them in telco versus healthcare is exactly the same. And I found that is absolutely resonated. If I then talk about what's nuanced and different, obviously language, lots of different words, a different taxonomy, but also mindset and focus. The focus on customer and the focus on people probably outweighs the commercial realities in healthcare. And that's just across the board in this industry from my perspective. That's a refreshing change in some aspects, but that's also makes it somewhat challenging because you have to also address those market realities and those financial realities the sector is in. Nobody is oblivious to them, but the trade-offs, I guess, are much more significant. You're not just trading off between one product or another or one service or another like you would in a telco, and you might maybe sunset one or decommission one or outsource or whatever. In the healthcare space, you turn off a service, that means people no longer are receiving that care potentially. What do you do? How do you support people? Because the care system in Australia is so interconnected. It is not that if somebody stops, someone else can necessarily pick that right up. There are people, we are all consumers of healthcare services. If we can't go and receive that care somewhere, what do we do? So I feel that the impact is much more personal, if I was to call it that. That's just my experience from working in this space. The other thing I would say, and it's something that our former CEO once shared with me, sort of a saying or mantra he always had, was you have to walk alongside people and meet them where they're at and bring them on that journey. A lot of the tools, techniques, the ways of thinking, be it financial services or insurance or telecommunications and sort of tech and IT, are probably more on the bleeding edge. Whereas in other industries like healthcare, it's probably a little bit behind in just some of those more modern and sophisticated ways of driving change and transformation. And really, it's incumbent on you as a transformation leader to A, build that capability internally, B, share your knowledge and bring people on the journey, help them upskill, help them understand a new way of working. If you think about what they do day in, day out, they are providing care. BAU is the most important thing. Change and transformation is secondary. Their primary focus, I go back to their mission, is providing that high and safe quality care. You have to find a way to weave in the change and transformation in amongst the BAU and educate them on new ways of working, new tools, techniques, and why transformation is a must-have, not nice to have. And I think the third thing in terms of, I guess, the difference from an execution perspective is the capability. So in telecommunications, digital literacy and I guess familiarity with working within large-scale transformation programs, my experience is significantly higher. So you're starting from a base where you're not necessarily needing to articulate and explain how transformation works, the roles that people play, the role of a program director and a program manager versus, say, a PM or a change manager or BA, they're well understood. In healthcare, and I've spoken to many healthcare leaders across Australia, America, Europe, and a few other countries, those roles all mean something different. And maybe the familiarity, if I call it that, is probably not as strong. So people don't know how to work with them necessarily or have them work to their top of scope necessarily, because it's not as prevalent as it is in telecommunications, which has gone through these types of changes since its inception and have had these skill sets and capabilities either embedded in their organizations or brought into their organization since day one. And they're probably the biggest, I guess, nuances or differences between the two industries in executing change and transformation.
No, thank you for sharing that, and I can definitely relate to what you're sharing there in terms of the familiarity of the transformation as a role in healthcare And I think it's also the fact that, like the healthcare as an industry is something that's really slow moving compared to something like telco. So
Mhm.
the need for them to adapt hasn't really existed. But at the same time, I think like in a country like Australia, what I see is that healthcare is an industry that's really complex because of the different models we have, the private model, and then the funding system we have, across both the state and federal. So obviously, like from federal level, we have Medicare as the fund system for the services, but then at the state level, we have the facilities being funded by the state governments for the public sector, and then obviously private sector has to find its own funding for the facilities, right? So that's where I think like it becomes interesting for organizations like Calvary. And I guess maybe if I can, sorry, were you going to say something?
All I was going to say was the other challenge you have. It's not a challenge, but it also adds to that complexity. Is we are an aging population in Australia, and the contemporary needs and the contemporary expectations people have is to receive high quality care in the comfort of their own home. Nobody wants to stay in a hospital longer than they need to. People want to consume, and we saw this during COVID, the appetite to consume virtualized telehealth and sort of in-home care is increasing and has increased. There is obviously the regulatory catch-up that needs to occur, and as private providers of healthcare services, so not just hospitals, but aged care and home care services, there is all the regulatory reform and the aged care bill and other bills to contend with. There's also private revenue models you need to come up with. There's also the large capital investments you need where you do run the large scale of facilities. And so you do have all these pressures to contend with. It's a much more complex business fundamentally. It's a much more complex industry than many others.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that makes it interesting and exciting, if I be honest, because that's where a lot of innovation can come from, because it's not stagnant. But with that comes a lot more thinking you need to do about how to actually transform and find those niches that you're going to win in.
Absolutely. Now that's actually where I was going to take that conversation as well. To me, I think like being able to identify how can we actually do things differently, and I think like to me where I really see us need to rethink this is AI gives us a lot more opportunities for actually doing things differently, right? And I think like not many people talk about it today, maybe because it's kind of faded off a little bit. Is probably blockchain and the capabilities that the decentralized technologies enable, right? And to me, I feel like yes, the state government, the state health sector, and obviously the federal health sector might not really see opportunities with things like distributed technologies, right? Ledger technologies. But for private healthcare providers like Calvary, I think there are opportunities that you can actually explore around that. And I think like when you think about combining distributed ledger technology with something like AI, there are new business models that you can actually really start to create where you can start experimenting and innovating. And to me, I think that's an exciting space that we haven't really scratched the surface on much in Australia and maybe broadly or globally across the healthcare sector as well.
You're absolutely right. What I would say, and I'll just use AI as an example, what I find refreshing is the focus on ethics and use of AI in a responsible way is really well considered in healthcare because we're dealing with people on personally identifiable information and their actual care. The flip side to that is yes, it does move a bit slower than other industries. But because it's well considered, because there is that focus on sort of governance, ethical use, and what we should use it for versus maybe what we shouldn't use it for, I find then the use cases become more compelling because there's much more clarity in people's minds. It's just, I guess, that time to value or that time from concept to let's maybe try pilot or something is a longer lead time than it would be in other industries.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think like you definitely see that in industries like military or defense as well, where things move at a much more glacial pace. And I think like some of the things that have been tried in maybe like the financial services sector actually maybe starting to mature enough now that you can actually start to apply things in some of the other industries. There are opportunities for things that you can actually look at in like in terms of parallels that you can bring from other industries into healthcare, but it's a largely untapped area. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe just moving on to the next point that I want to talk about. Obviously, you touched on this about this a couple of times in terms of being able to bring people on the journey from where meeting people where they are and being able to bring them on the journey. And I think like obviously the customer lens of that or the patient lens of that in healthcare and the broader stakeholders in the healthcare sector is very much important as well. But I think when an organization is going through change or transformation, where I really see a need to take a different approach with how things are evolving today, is especially with in terms of how you lead your teams to actually drive that transformation. And maybe if we were to look at the I guess maybe compare the telco versus healthcare lens again in terms of the people leadership aspect, how do you see that difference in terms of your experience across these two different industries?
Yeah. So for me, and this may be a slightly different view, I see people leadership as the same no matter what industry you're in, fundamentally. So there is some nuances, but fundamentally, your role as a leader is to build a high-performing team. And I sort of equate it to you want a team that can work as a team. You don't just want a team of champions, you want a champion team. And people that work to top of scope, people that are highly capable, highly skilled, highly adept, want to work with peers that are at the same level as them or above. They then foster their own sort of level of excellence and standards that they accept. They don't want sort of your B grade, C grade, or D grade
Absolutely.
players.
And I think Steve Jobs made this comment as well. I think
Absolutely,
I don't know if you
absolutely.
remember that quote.
I do.
I can't remember the
Absolutely.
exact
Yeah.
quote, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I would say, it's your role to provide air cover. So if you want your team to push hard, to drive outcomes hard, if you want to have this first mover advantage, so because I believe speed wins in this day and age, be it first mover or catching up and then overtaking, you're going to hit some bumps along the way. You might fly too close to the sun. Your role is to provide that air cover. Your role is to have that credibility and trust and be able to have those open and frank conversations with your team, with executives, with peers, and with others to help move things and unblock things that shouldn't necessarily rely on process. Processes is there to ensure a business runs smoothly and effectively, is to ensure it runs like clockwork. But when you're driving large scale change and transformation, you are the disruptor. If the process starts to get in your way, you need to actually work through that process and work with the leads to say, hey, I'm going to meet all your governance requirements, but then we need to have this thing prioritized. It comes down to that alignment, and do you have people on the same page? I think the other thing is you just need to create a great culture, a culture that people want to be a part of. So it's sort of like your personal brand. What is your team's brand? What is the employee value proposition in your own team? One thing I spent a lot of time doing, particularly when I joined Calvary, was the first thing I did with my team when I was building it up from the ground up, was I spent a lot of time working on what is our EVP for the existing team members. And if I went to market, what are the 3 or 5 things I could say, this is why you should join my team. This is what's in it for you. This is what I can provide you, and I can guarantee to you if you come and join my team. But this is what I want in return, because it's just as important in creating value for people and then coming to work and feeling like they're getting something out of it as it is for myself and for any organization I work in. And that talks to psychological safety, that talks to high degrees of trust, flexibility, career development, growth opportunities, mentoring, but it also talks about just also having fun. It talks about being rewarded and recognized for what you do, being able to learn something new, experiment, test and learn and fail. And it's okay to fail. Make mistakes as long as it's not the same mistake twice. But I go back to, do you want to be part of a high performing team or not? And if you do, then I want you. And I'm happy to invest that time in you. And I want to learn from you because I want people that are smarter than myself. And I often find myself finding those people, which is great. But if you don't want to be a part of that team and that's not what you want, that's completely fine. Then this isn't the right fit for you. It doesn't mean that person's not good. It just means they better fit somewhere else. And you help them find what that something else may be. The other thing is, and I sort of don't work under any illusion, and this is probably more I was able to do in telco than in healthcare. In telco, it's probably more generally accepted that 2 to 3 years is generally the length of time people spend in a role or in a team. Probably these days it's probably closer to 1 year, 1.5 years, really, if you're lucky. So I used to say to my teams all the time, in 2 years' time, I expect you to have progressed or moved on elsewhere. Because you are more than capable. You are amazing. You're recognized. You're doing great jobs. I will help you get there. In healthcare, I found that people tend to have a longer tenure in the same roles, and it's probably a different perception if you move around more quickly. And I found that confronting myself because my last few roles prior to joining this organization, I probably spent 1 to 1.5 years doing because I like that rapid change and moving around and learning things new. Whereas a lot of the feedback I've received probably in the last few years has been, oh, you need, 3 to 5 years in a role minimum. And I go, since when does length of time equate to outcome and capability? And that's I found confronting as a concept. The other thing I would say in telco, it tends to be a much more flatter structure. Hierarchy is there, but it's less important. Whereas in healthcare, the hierarchy is there because it comes from a safety and a risk management perspective, but that can sometimes be counterintuitive to driving change and moving at pace. And you just have to work within those constraints, and all organizations have them, in your ability to execute fast and move fast and help your team move fast as well.
No, thank you for sharing that. It was refreshing to hear you talk about the EVP, employee value proposition. I haven't actually heard too many people say that, and I've actually used that
Yep.
term before
Yeah,
myself.
it's so important. It is. I still have this it's one slide and it's 4 circles that talks about, I can recite it to you. So if you were to join my transformation team 3 years ago, it was this is what's in it for you. You're going to build a strategy execution toolkit. You're going to solve complex and interesting problems. You're going to be work amongst the networks of peers, both internally and externally. And you're going to have these great development opportunities that's focused on you and your career path, whatever that means. I can recite it like that because it's important to the people who want to join this type of team to know what's in it for them. Beyond, oh, this is just the job, come turn up and you get paid for what you do. That's not enough for anybody. That doesn't motivate, that doesn't excite people, that doesn't get them to do 150, 200%.
Definitely. And I think, yes, it's about keeping them motivated, but at the same time, it's also about attracting that high performance that actually want to be in that fast moving environment. And people who know how to actually drive change even in slow moving industries, but
Absolutely.
be able to use the right approach and the right lens in order to actually get things done. Not
What
take shortcuts.
absolutely. One of the things I've always said also, it's much harder to build momentum and build that high performing team than it is to just, bring anybody on board and just get, anybody available. Like you're often better off waiting to get the right person than just getting anybody. That's far more detrimental. Just because someone's available, if they're not the right fit, capability wise, culture wise, or mindset or approach wise to what you need, you're better off holding off to get the right person than just getting anybody. Because as you would know very well, your credibility matters and you're only as good as the last change or transformation or initiative that you work on. And because you're dealing with the same stakeholders, particularly at the senior levels, when you're, a head of transformation or like yourself leading a innovative consultancy, you need to ensure that every engagement, every interaction, every experience is as great as it possibly can be. And where it's not, you own it frankly and you try to do better next time. But you can't just accept mediocrity.
No.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And I think, one of the other things that you brought up there about, how do you adapt, get people, let people adapt to that slow moving pace in terms of having multiple layers that you need to navigate, right? And to me, I think, that's an important factor around how do we drive change in an organization like healthcare, right? Sorry, industry like healthcare. And obviously, yes, having that traditional approach to how they thought about risk management helped. But I think this is where there are opportunities to actually rethink that model with how can technology help with some of these things as well. And to me, that's an exciting area, especially I think when it comes to how do we rethink regulated industries through the lenses of technologies like AI and distributed ledger technologies, right? And there are opportunities that actually are being presented to private healthcare organizations like Calvary that I think are quite exciting. I mean, maybe if you were to think about the future outlook in terms of health transformation of healthcare in Australia, how do you see this evolving? Because obviously Australia has multiple layers of how we structured our healthcare industry. And obviously at the moment, you've probably seen what's happening in academics space in terms of all the universities that's going through some of the changes at the moment, and all the
Yep.
pushback, right? And I feel like, it's probably a matter of time before this kind of push starts coming into the healthcare sector, especially the public healthcare sector in Australia, right? And how do you see organizations like Calvary being able to, I guess, maybe take benefits from some of that pressure that's going to come in? Because obviously, compared to public private, there's a significant cost differential in terms of your cost to provide services, and obviously the funding levels as well, right? So,
Mm.
what are some of the things that you see as maybe opportunities for organizations like Calvary, and also maybe in terms of the transformation and creating the transformation muscle memory for organizations to be able to continually adapt to what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I was to talk about maybe five, I guess, shifts or trends that I see happening in just the healthcare sector in relation to transformation and large scale transformation, it would be these sort of five things. I think firstly, moving to much more platform centric and integrated models for delivering change and running businesses than point solutions. So in the past, there's a lot of point solutions and bespoke processes and different practices, maybe based on geography, maybe based on different services you're providing. But I think the future is much more centralized, consistent, consolidated, singular platforms or singular processes or singular services, providing those services to organizations or to clients. It's too cost prohibitive in this sector to do otherwise. I think secondly, my view is there's going to be a major influx and upskilling in digital literacy, in the use of new technologies like generative AI and automation and other tools and systems, as well as an increase in, I guess, the acceptance and the use of capabilities like change management, like transformation in all organizations. I think the I think the reluctance to maybe have used those capabilities in the past is gone. I think there is that general acceptance by healthcare leaders across the board that it is a must do. You can't not do these things and you can't not have these capabilities. I think the third thing also is the rising importance of a people and culture, an employee focus, where the workforce is not just seen as an afterthought, but the workforce is seen as probably the most important thing, because the workforce delivers the care to your customers. And your role as leaders is to support your workforce as best as possible. With the war on talent, with complex regulatory reform, with a limited pool, with capability gaps left, right, and center, I see from a transformation perspective a heightened focus on workforce attraction, retention, and capability development. So think learning pathways, think programs partnering with universities and tertiary education institutions like TAFEs and other academies, etc. The fourth shift that I see is moving towards large-scale transformation of businesses, not sporadic projects and programs. So I think in the past, and I've spoken to a lot of providers, particularly in the aged care and hospital space, where there might be anywhere from 50 to 200 projects running. I think in the future, you'll see where sort of telco and other industries have moved to where it's one large-scale transformation program with the initiatives and projects underneath in one tightly governed and orchestrated manner with a dedicated capability to support that, as opposed to hundreds of projects and programs everywhere running concurrently in an unsequenced manner. So sort of that portfolio management or program management becomes a really core skill in the future. And finally, the thing I actually see staying the same and maybe just becoming more just acknowledged is the need to have stakeholder engagement. So your customers, your partners, your VMOs, be it health funds, be it service providers, be it people you procure services from, consultants who you may engage, your staff, but all of the organization involved from day zero. I think that's going to become the way these things are designed and shaped moving forward, as opposed to how they may have been done traditionally, which is sort of that that push out. I think it's going to be very much that outside in focus.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and I can definitely relate to those five areas that you talked about, and I think the what you mentioned about having that centralized approach. is definitely something that we really thought through at 𝗠𝗏𝗺 about the transformation to the methodology that we created. But what we've also realized is that different parts of the organization kind of have like these different approaches to try and driving things. So what we've created is kind of like these practice patterns or method guides that we call, that allows organizations to actually adopt transformation 2.0 by using things like design thinking or strategic doing or agile or even some of the other engineering practices that we've actually created practice patterns around. So I think like that ability to take that centralized approach to strategic alignment is what's necessary, right? But in terms of the execution, I think like people, as you said earlier, like the tools of how you drive the change will be different, right? And how you bring the people on the journey is what's more important. So
Mhm.
being able to meet people where they are at in terms of their capabilities, their preferences, and also I guess maybe the way they are used to driving change is what we really thought through in terms of the transformation to the approach. Because what we realized is trying to get someone to think differently and do things differently is harder than actually bringing a methodology that helps them to align it to is to a broader set of anchors that you're trying to drive towards, right? So that's
Absolutely.
very much the lens that we've taken. And I really enjoy the conversation around being able to contrast between healthcare and telco today, Tony. And it really resonated what you talked about in terms of the fast moving nature of telcos as versus how how the healthcare is actually moving a lot slower. But I think like what we also agreeing is that the healthcare is actually starting to really see that change is becoming a constant for them as well. And I think not just healthcare, I think most organizations will actually need to start thinking about change as the only constant and start building change capability internally, right? And that's
Uh,
very much what we sorry.
well, no, I don't know. I was just going to say, you often hear about organizations talk about change fatigue and need to build change resilience. But what I've also say is you actually need to build change stamina. You actually need to
Change
become
muscle memory is what we call it. Transformation
absolutely.
muscle memory.
Absolutely. So if you think about if you're training, so I love boxing. I've been boxing now for 3 years. I've randomly fell into it. I don't, it's a long story, but I love it. I've been doing it. I've got a trainer. He's amazing. Um, and one of the things, if you think about when you're starting any sport or any skill, right, you get tired very quickly when you've never done it before. And yes, you need to build your resilience to persist through it, but you also need to build your stamina to be able to do more of it.
Yeah.
And this is what I feel is missing with legacy change management mindsets about it's constantly sort of a critique on executives or leaders trying to do too much, but the world is constantly changing.
Yeah.
Change is often initiated from in the healthcare space, federally and Commonwealth and government or by necessity because things just happen. You can't just sit there and say, we needed to stop everything and only do one thing at a time. That's never going to be reality. You have to help people build that muscle memory or that stamina, in addition to the resilience and helping them navigate through complex change. And yes, managing burnout and psychological safety, absolutely. But I often feel that last piece is sort of missing sometimes from the conversation. And that may be a contentious point. The same way I often say you have to allow some fires to burn, like little fires to burn, because you can't put out every single fire. You can't do everything at the same time. But I feel like there needs to be a recognition of reality in how you help people navigate through this ever-changing and rapidly changing environment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think like, we talk about this organizational
Mm.
ambidexterity or being able to explore and exploit. And I think
Mhm.
for a lot of commercial industries, it's definitely relevant. And I think, Calvary being a private healthcare, obviously it's relevant to you guys as well. You need to figure out where do you create new value, and then obviously how do you harmonize that with your existing operations and exploit for the longer term is important. Yes, KI is still the primary metric for you, but being a commercial business, you still need to think about that exploit. So that's very much what we've been thinking about in terms of the methodology that we've created as well. And obviously being able to create that explore and exploit capabilities and being able to invest in them in parallel and being able to sustain that for the longer term is very much what we talk about in some of the funding model discussions that we have. And it's
Awesome.
interesting
Yeah.
that you're bringing that up.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. So it's interesting you say that also. About 10 years ago, I was fortunate to go on this leadership program in Singapore that was sponsored by 𝗠𝗏𝗺𝗺𝗺. And they had this group called 𝗍𝗏𝗧𝗏. And 𝗍𝗏𝗧𝗏 are very well known in working with large product based organizations. So think pharmaceuticals or fast moving consumer goods. etc. And they called this sort of transformation A and transformation B. So how do you sort of optimize your core business to create the investment to fund those future growth pursuits? And they have this concept of a capability link between that transformation A and transformation B. So how do you have the right capabilities to run your business and change it at the same time? In the project management world, there was a model called P3O from the Office of Government Commerce that had this same concept called run the business, change the business, and you're perpetually doing both at the same time. I think it's an important reminder to all organizations that you can't just do BAU, because if all you're doing is BAU, you're actually falling behind.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think like the way we talk about it is new core and legacy core, but it's
Mhm,
just you have the new core, you have the legacy core, but being able to move them both at the same rate is what's more important now, because
mhm,
what AI is doing is it's shifting that the value boundaries for different industries and different sectors. So like for an organization like healthcare will actually have opportunities in other areas. So you need that fluidity around how you manage that new core and legacy core. So the models like 3PO and what
mhm.
Site talks about, yeah, they did talk about the ability to do both. And I think what's happening now is like what I usually refer to as this, like the chessboard and the rice experiment. I don't know if you heard about this, right?
No?
So they you should. I think it started off from one of the kings wanting to reward someone, one of the citizens that did something for him, and he asked this citizen, "What would you like as the reward?" And the citizen said, I would like a grain of rice for every square on the chessboard. But then every time you move on to the next one, double it, right?
I like that.
So what happened was, obviously when you go from one to two to three to, obviously like the eight, by the time you get to the eight, you actually talking quite a large number. But then when you actually move to the 32nd square, you're talking 2 to the power of 32. But what's happening with AI is actually we are very much in actually that second half of the chessboard now. We've gone past the 2 to the power of 32, but then now actually the change is accelerating at such a rapid pace. Organizations actually really need to be quite adaptive in terms of how they rethink their business. So where we really look at is actually now how do we actually enable that agility and the fluidity for the businesses in terms of rethinking what their business looks like, especially like with AI. If the value boundaries are shifting, organizations need to be able to move at rapid pace and be able to capture those opportunities. I think in the commercial world it's really important. And I think like for some for organizations in healthcare, probably it'll probably give a little bit more opportunities to respond, time to respond, because of the nature of regulations you have, and also the nature of the funding models you have, especially for the public sector. And I think like private sector, there are probably opportunities that you can leverage much quicker, right? And I think that's where I'm really excited about in organizations like Calvary, where you guys are positioned. You guys have a lot of opportunities that you can benefit from as things move, especially with the state, the public sector not having that level of flexibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, and someone mentioned this to me a few weeks ago, which was, AI has been around for a long time. Everything is perceived AI, which it's not. But in terms of generative AI, these are the worst generative AI tools we will ever use. And just think about that. These are the worst versions of these tools we'll ever use. They will only get better from here, but yet such a disruptive impact they have already had on a global scale. And when you step back and think about that, it's almost, to me, it's not the same level, but it's almost as when the calculator was invented. From doing mathematics by hand to now a calculator can do it for you. It's not that same level, but it almost feels, in sort of magnitude wise, it's a similar magnitude in the disruptive impact it is having globally.
Indeed, indeed. And yes, generative AI is definitely gonna move on a lot more. And I think like, what the opportunities around AI, I think like is definitely gonna accelerate a lot more as organizations move into AGI and ASI. But
Mhm.
I think that's probably still a few years away, right? And organizations will still have a bit more time before that arrives. But obviously, that's a hotly debated topic again, right?
Yep, it is.
And I
It
think
really is.
Microsoft's actually flipped on this a couple of times already. there was a time when they're saying, yes, AGI is here, and now they're saying no, it's not. So you never know, right? So I
Oh,
think, to me, I think
absolutely.
there's a level of marketing spin around this as well. I think, not just Microsoft. I think, uh, um, Mark Benny of Salesforce, he flips back and forth a lot in terms of his
They
messaging to
all
the
do.
market.
I think the key thing is, and when particularly in any sector, it's incumbent on every leader to assess whatever the technologies are and really think about what are the problems you're trying to solve and what are the opportunities you're trying to create? What is your actual business strategy and what is the best business model and operating model to enable that? Where do any of these technologies, be it new, emerging, existing, actually fit in? So
Absolutely.
I'd almost argue that your enterprise architecture, your business architecture, and sort of your strategy need to intersect. But what then becomes the most important thing once you've sort of got broad alignment between those three pieces is strategy execution. And that is where your transformation team, that is where your program delivery teams, your change managers, your EPMOs, your transformation officers become the most important investment to coordinate, oversee, orchestrate, and help execute. Because as you know, execution becomes the biggest problem once you've actually got that first piece sorted. And the first piece is always the hardest piece.
Yeah.
But once you've got that sorted to some reasonable degree that you can sign off and agree, yep, we're going to go down this path, it becomes an execution problem. And that's mostly culture, but it's also capability.
Absolutely.
And that is where you then need to turn your mind to in the transformation space.
Definitely. And I think strategy execution is where you'll really make the impact. And
Mhm.
what we also are seeing is that the strategy itself is actually becoming a lot more fluid nowadays, because organizations need that capability to adapt because the technology is moving at such a rapid pace. So being able to define a strategy and execute, and at the same time make your strategy adaptable, that's where the organizations will
Yeah,
actually have opportunities to win.
absolutely agree with you.
Amazing. I really enjoyed the conversation today, Tony. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. And I look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Likewise, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to speak with you, Chamara, today, and this is talk all things transformation and change, where the all industries are really heading, and it's some of the innovative and new ways people are looking to work. And the way we work is just as important as the work itself. And it's pleasing to hear some of the insights you've been able to share as well. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. That's it for today's episode of Transformation 2.0. I hope you found insights that will help you lead change with confidence. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformational stories to leaders like you. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, and if you have a topic or guest you would love to hear on the show, let us know. See you next time.